a couple other things that have happened legislatively. I don't know how to say that. The U.S. Copyright Office clarified that copyright protection only applies when there are works with sufficient human creative input. And Ghaith is going to get into that a little bit more specifically because that's really important for us as producers. And then there's other things like the increased focus on union protections. For example, actors, you cannot digitally clone an actor without their approval and also without paying them. And that there's now precedence for metadata auditability, which is when Kathleen speaks in a minute, where the gold mines come in, where we might be able to figure out how to make some money on this. And there's international IP conflicts, like Ghaith said. What is here does not necessarily travel overseas, and it doesn't apply everywhere. And there's a growing trend of shifting terminologies, which is forcing new definitions. So even in our contracts, I have to learn new definitions. It used to be called AI tools. Now the AI tools are called AI collaborators. They used to be called digital extras, right? Digital extras, you saw them in the credits. Now they are synthetic performers. And when I think about this, I'm thinking, did AI suggest those terms? Because they seem a little human-like to me. So with the changes happening every month, Ghaith, like you're talking about, and you are at the highest level of these conversations on the legal side of things, I'd like you to unpack how this is going to work for us and what happens in the vendor contracts for us, and most importantly, who owns what and can I copyright it?
So a lot of what I do, I've been fortunate to be on both sides of the ecosystem, or on multiple sides of the ecosystem. One being advising the Metas, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the Black Forests who develop Flux, advising them directly on how they can draft their terms when others are interacting with them. And the first question they always tell me is, all my users, they want to know what can they do with the output of these models. And it can be really confusing, because in some cases you see some models that are just made freely available. Go take it, it's an open source model, you can do what you want with it. But if you want to own or commercialize the content, that's where you have to then subscribe to a higher tier of model. And a lot of folks don't understand, it's literally the exact same model. It's not like it has different functionality. It's just that the legal terms that are attached to the use can differ based on which version you might be using.
Ghaith, can I ask a question? Because this is really important for producers. So if you're using the free version of whatever your AI platform is, and I realize, oh, someone's buying it now, and I've just generated all of this great content, now I pay for it. Do I have to recreate it in the paid version, or can I use the version that was in the non-paid version? Like, this is confusing.
Yeah.
No, you gotta recreate it.
You gotta recreate it. Okay, so this is really important for us, right?
Sorry, guys.
You can't just take it and use that and then say, now I'm paying for it. So what that means is, think about it. Document all your prompts. Document everything that you put into, if you're ever using a free version. Document it, right?
Yeah.
So that you can try to recreate it. It's not gonna be perfect.
Definitely recreate the
It won't
same
be
thing.
perfect.
That's not how generative AI works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, sometimes you might be thoughtful and say, I just want to experiment with this. This is to help me just come up with concepts or ideas, or I want to show a casting director something, or I want to be able to work with costume and help them understand what I'm going for. And in those cases, I will just tell you what I'm seeing in the market is that people are engaging with the open source models. In those cases, it's not directly interacting with eyeballs. Is that permitted? That's a conversation that we can have. But let's just talk about kind of the trends. Right now, just in the conversations that I have with model developers, they don't want to own the output that comes out from these models. They don't want that noise. They don't want to be able to have ownership, or to have you all come and say, why did you try to own this output that came out? That's not what they're looking for. And a lot of them will just disclaim ownership rights, but they'll be really careful to tell you, I'm not guaranteeing you own this, because there's a whole set of additional law outside of the contract that we'll get into. But as I said, look for those restrictions. What restrictions do they have on how you can use them? Can you use them in production-ready content? Can you use them and distribute them to your providers? We'll get into some of the restrictions. And then the last piece that I will say on these, and this might be the most relevant when you are using content or rights that have been licensed into you, and this is where providers really, really do care about. How can the tool providers themselves reuse either the content that you've put in or the output that has come out? That's where the rubber hits the road, because the reality right now is there's just not enough content out there for these model developers to keep training and improving their models. And a shortcut, for better or for worse, and we talk about what that's doing to our world, but the shortcut is they're using the output of these models to then further train and improve their models. And so all that good, important, creative stuff that are being generated by those models, that is a gold mine for the providers of those, the trainers, and they want to be able to reuse those. And what does that mean when you've got licensed content that's been brought into you that says you can't share this with anybody else, you can't allow anybody else to reuse or reproduce that? That's where we have to be really thoughtful about what can the providers do.
Yeah, and how do you advise producers to think about when they're fine-tuning models with their own content? Or if they're a writer and they've written a Bible and now they want to take that Bible and use Claude to flesh it out.
Yep.
Claude can then use their words to further train Claude, correct?
Right. Yeah. So fine tuning is this concept for folks who I'm sure some folks have been in the trenches on this, and some are like, oh, I know that word, I guess. But when we're talking about fine tuning, we're talking about taking a vanilla model, whether it's VO3 or Claude or Black Forest Flux or Ideogram, what have you, and saying, I'm going to train it just like I would train a staff member of mine or somebody on my team on a ton of my own content, so that when I'm using it, whether I'm doing that through a formal training layer, and those interfaces exist. You can log on right now to, for example, llama.api.com, and you're directly uploading your content, and you're getting a version of a model that is custom for you, that knows what you want, knows the look and feel that you want. A lot of those terms are going to say things, because I've written some of them, and please don't attack me afterwards if you're not happy with it. But a lot of those terms do say things like, we can reuse that content, and you got to be careful. But on the other hand, we are advising, and I am telling model developers, why do you want that? Do you honestly really want that, or are you just being grabby? What do you really need to do? And so there is a trend for model developers to say, I'm going to let them fine tune, and I'm going to put that in a dedicated, segregated environment that nobody else will have access to.
So Ghaith, if because I know in some of these platforms I can turn off, use my data to train the rest of your model. I can turn that off, but it sounds like there might be also something else contractually that I need to do if I'm working on a commercial venture with these platforms.
Yeah, and you should look at what the tiers of use are. Many of them, the tiers of use, because the reality, like I said, is the models are not that different. The ways people are distinguishing tiers of use, or what the gold gives you versus the silver or the bronze package, are additional rights and less uses by the model developer.
So we have to read all that fine print. That we just say, I agree, I agree.
When you're thinking about this, how do you think about if they're using a foundation model and there's existing IP in it, like that's been scraped from the internet?
Yeah.
The intermingling of IP when they're commercially using, and
those are all great. How about
diving into the gnarly shit?
We have a section later where we'll talk about, do model developers, do they have your back when, if hopefully you never do, but if you do get sued for use of the models or use of the output of the models, what do the model developers, what are their obligations to you? That's actually been changing a lot. That is a very big change from last year. And there are levels of indemnity that are being provided, i.e., I will make you whole if you get sued from use of the models, but they have a lot of exceptions. We'll get into that later, yeah. The other big thing that I want to talk about, so I previewed last year that the U.S. Copyright Office was looking at this subject because they were getting flooded with applications of people saying, look at my generated output, I want to register a copyright on, I want to get a registered copyright on it. Can I? And they were rejecting, and folks from last year might remember we talked about Zarya of the Dawn, which was an example of a comic book in which the pictures of that comic book were generated using Midjourney, which was still a really widely used tool. And the Copyright Office said, no, those pictures are not copyrightable. You can register and this is really important for you all where they've clarified. You can register the comic book as a whole, and what that means is you get to own the collection, the unique way in which that's been collected, but the individual assets within that book, I'm not going to let you register. So what does that mean for you? It might mean I'm going to make a clip and I'm going to use a tree or a car or some model in there that's been generated by AI, but I don't really care if somebody reuses that tree or that car. That's not what I'm worried about. I don't want somebody to use the entire clip. That's what I care about. And the Copyright Office has tried to thread that and say, when you as a human are selecting what goes where, you're saying, I want that tree there, I want that person to be over here, I want them to say this, that human selection can make the entire collection as a whole, the piece that eyeballs actually see, that copyrightable, even if the individual assets within them are not. That's a really important distinction. If you go back one slide, actually, I just want to talk about one thing from there. So here's what they did. They did a report. It came out January 2025, and it was trying to answer the question about what do you own when you are using these tools. And here's what they said. They said a few things, but just look at the one in red. I put the others here in case anybody, I already see some folks taking pictures of it and you want to just read it on your own. But the part in red is the most important. And that they said, copyright does not extend to purely AI-generated material or where there is insufficient human control over the expressive elements. What does that mean? That means you can have the most incredible prompt. I came up with a 5,000-word prompt. It's really creative. Nobody could figure out how I prompted this tool. That doesn't matter, because that's not the expressive element. The expressive element is what comes out on the other side, the output. And the Copyright Office sees it like you gave an independent contractor out there a 5,000 text story Bible and you said, make something out of this. That doesn't mean you own what they made unless you have a contractual written agreement for them to assign those rights to you. And the same principle is what the Copyright Office is using now when you're engaging with these AI tools.